In filmmaking and animation, there are all sorts of rules that people follow, things like negative space, the rule of thirds, or a shot's symmetry and balance. They're the type of thing that goes unnoticed unless you're looking for it. But rules of composition are everywhere. Almost every shot in a well-crafted story is deliberate. But what happens when you break those rules on purpose, and then you pair it with a perfectly crafted little story? Welcome to a running series called Exploring Frieren. My name is Pei, and today we're talking about when a show's weirdest shot might just be its best. The most recent video I did that's found a lot of success in the algorithm was talking about sound design in a movie called Look Back. Specifically about how the choice to include silence can demonstrate just how skilled a sound designer is. People so often can point at great cinematography and highlight it, but very rarely do they have the tools to properly express what makes it so great. Because even if you haven't been educated in the language to describe great cinematography, it's often very intuitive. Good shots often come across clearly in the emotions you experience during a scene. But that doesn't mean there aren't a range of different design choices being made constantly to help you have that experience. Let's take a second to define the key terms I'll be using. The rule of thirds has to do with composition, using this 9x9 grid to determine where the subjects of a shot should be placed. There tends to be an emphasis placed on the vertical lines and the top two intersecting points. If you were to place this grid over an entire episode of Frieren, it's shocking how often they rely on this specific framing. Negative space refers to the things around a subject, often the background or empty space. This image, for example, uses negative space to imply a second bear hugging the first one. And in this shot, this is what would be defined as negative space. The general rule that's followed in a vast majority of shots is that characters should be facing the negative space, not the edge of the frame. Another two sets of terms that go together are symmetry and balance. Symmetry is pretty straightforward, but balance is a little bit more conceptual. Essentially, it's assigning each object or person in a frame a theoretical weight and then making sure that that weight's distributed somewhat evenly. This shot demonstrates a couple of these concepts pretty well. Himmel is standing exactly on one of the rule of thirds vertical lines. Now notice how Old Man Vol is skewed out. That's because Himmel has his party behind him, and if he were placed in the rule of thirds like Himmel, the image would feel unbalanced. This shot from the same scene also demonstrates it. The taller Hyder is played opposite the shorter Eisen and Frieren to keep the image more balanced. The more you watch this show, or any well-made anime for that matter, the more you'll notice that these rules for composition are everywhere. They're used in really cool ways constantly, and they're also broken. Take this shot from the first episode of Severance, for example. Everyone and everything in this shot besides one person follow the rules of symmetry and balance. The female character paintings and weird microphone camera thing are all centered and symmetrical. The monitor on one side is counterbalanced by the cups, pens, and open box. But by placing the man behind her on the same side as the monitor, it creates a subconscious sense of discomfort. And I find that really cool. Deliberately breaking the rules when you showcase time and time again that you can follow them can do so much for making dynamic scenes. Rules are best explored when broken. However, that only applies in the hands of a skilled craftsman. And I think Frieren has a really powerful scene that demonstrates this. And to fully understand that, we should understand two things: what Frieren's generally about and the story of Old Man Vol. Frieren is a story that explores the human condition in many different types of ways, one of which is looking at the world through the lens of an everlasting elf, someone who's lived over 1,000 years. So many components of the story are built around the difficulties that someone living that long would face. An incredible situation to tell an outstanding story built around an ensemble cast. Frieren Beyond Journey's End is about the namesake character Frieren recontextualizing her old journey with a new one. And in both cases, she had the opportunity to interact with an old friend, a 300-year-old dwarf. Dwarves, by the way, in this universe have a lifespan of about 300 years. This warrior, near the end of his life, is dedicated to one singular goal: protecting this small town, all because of a promise he made his human wife hundreds of years ago. Old Man Vol is introduced, knocking Stark, the party's warrior, to the ground with little effort, playing on the fact that he's perceived to be senile. One of the first videos I made about Frieren was talking about how it's capable of telling such a compelling story in just 9 minutes, and once again they demonstrate that, literally taking about 9 minutes to tell the story of Old Man Vol. But the emotional crux of this story comes when Frieren and Vol are walking through an illuminated forest at night. They're reminiscing with one another, remembering a conversation they had with Himmel 80 years ago where she promised to carry his legacy. And as they're talking about this, Vol asks if she's finally setting out to kill the Demon King, something she had done 80 years prior. And they demonstrate her shock with these two shots. The first is having her stare to the left, where Vol is theoretically sitting, but the audience is cut off by the edge of the frame with the negative space behind her. And the second is this awkward framing where her nose is cut off, her eye is too far to the left, and we see the slightest bit of movement. An incredibly heavy moment executed so subtly by breaking composition rules. That shot, especially in reviewing the show, has solidified itself as one of my favorite of the series. For a while now, my comment section has been filled with so many people excited to hear about my opinion on the Old Man Vol story. And I think that's for good reason. This story so elegantly explores the themes of Frieren really well, and more importantly, the emotions behind those themes. What is it like to live 1,000 years and have everyone around you die? It'd be so easy to disconnect and separate yourself from all the things that feel like just blinks of the eye, brief moments, until one day you have a wake-up call and you realize you regret the way you're using your time even though you have so much of it. That tragedy and loss is really explored in this story. The way Vol, when he's introduced, uses the perception that he might be senile against Stark in a really interesting way sets up this finale. Even when Vol admits that he can't remember his wife's face or voice, it's not necessarily an admission of his age. It represents this beautiful idea of commitment to one's word, holding the memory of a loved one not only in your heart but also actions. And on paper, we understand that Frieren has lost people, even getting glimpses into her relationship with her past master. Except in that situation, we know the predetermined end given its presentation as a flashback. And there are moments in this story where Frieren loses people and we experience it alongside her. And I found all of those losses hit harder for me in repeat viewings because I had more time to attach onto the characters. But with Old Man Vol, I think it hit just as hard the first time as it did in repeat viewings. Not to say that there wasn't any depth to be discovered in rewatching this. This whole video exists because of things I noticed in repeat viewings. But in the repeat viewings of Frieren, there was a shifted lens, a deeper understanding of each character from the very beginning. Take the pilot for example, it hits in a completely different way after watching the first season. But with Old Man Vol, there was no major shift in perception. It was the same story hitting in the same way. But also there's an optimistic ending. The impacts of Frieren's old and new journeys and how it's changed her are demonstrated in the way she communicates with Vol, letting him know that she will carry him on in memory after he's gone. And the emotional exclamation point of this entire story is built around breaking rules, stepping away from the standards that you've set. I also think it's the type of thing that can be felt without even being understood. Because Frieren does this remarkable thing where it'll introduce us to a character that we didn't even know exists, give us all the exposition we need, tell an entire story, and then leave us heartbroken when we lose them. All while built off of a solid foundation of optimism and beauty. The story doesn't end with us having lost Old Man Vol, just accepted the fact that it's coming. And that's okay because he'll be carried into the future through memory and actions of those he influenced.